So I'm just creating a encapsulation of my book called Boolean. It is a science fiction book. The name comes from a metaphor I'm using to, I won't explain the metaphor, but I'll explain the definition of Boolean, which is an algorithm for which the output is true or false, but not true and false. The book starts in a lab where two separate research groups are not collaborating, are completely discrete, and researching completely separate topics. One is a neurobiology lab, and the other is a radiotelemetry lab. Radiotelemetry deals with imaging things in outer space and heavenly bodies, and it requires large telescopes or some form of imagery, and so it has rays or whatever that it is sending out and receiving back, which will tell you how far something is or how radioactive. Or I don't know much about it because I am not a radiotelemetrist, but or a cosmologist, but that's what they do. The neurobiology lab is where the main character ends up spending most of its time. It begins with a funny description and safety briefing of recent past attempts to market a machine which is a product of engineering, and to repurpose it, and how it failed, and how it succeeded in different ways due to marketing campaigns, which are comical in that they attempt to tell the focus groups that the machine is used for things that it has nothing to do with, which is a comment on how advances in science can be sensationalized and marketed, and the intentions of people who use technology can be wholly suspect and should be under a lot more scrutiny. But the focus groups may include a detector of past life experiences, of a procedural memory improvement device called the Mnemo was the successful result of this marketing. That was the marketing campaign they went with eventually due to the focus group. Another one was to improve your ambidexterity. Different things failed for different reasons. The past life one failed because participants presented the presupposition that there existed a past life. So there are different things which contribute to so it's kind of a comment on science more than anything. The safety briefing also goes over the basic physical dimensions of the machine. The machine is a input device, a neurological input device. So it actually is trying to produce something neurological in the participants. It is an attempt to replace optical vision with, and something like this exists already, but it is a sphere that you put in your mouth, where your tongue has millions of neurons which will sense physical protrusions from this sphere. Selective. So the sphere has bumps which can disappear and reappear and result in your tongue, which in your tongue sensing those different protrusions and making sense of them through neuroplasticity and kind of getting an impression of a picture from this sphere, like pixels in a camera that result from a photograph taken by a digital camera. So it corresponds to movements that they make. The machine is inputting that neural feedback from an electron microscope that participants are using within this study. And it doesn't work very well. The electron microscope is a two-dimensional image, and it's being conveyed on a three-dimensional sphere, which is telling the participants something and giving them a visual response, which is not an optical response. It's coming from their tongue, and it results in a sensation of vision, which is wholly novel to them. They haven't experienced a form of vision of this kind, but it's noise, and they don't really understand it, and it can give participants headaches. The participants which had any result at all received headaches and little sparks of quote-unquote light. Light is the most analogous sensory perception that they can report to experience. But they all report that it's kind of insufficient. It's not quite light. So, and it's not quite color, it's not quite shape, it's something different. In any case, this only happens to 4% of participants. They get rid of the other 96 and they try to go after these participants and do a case study on them as a follow-up. And time is passing in the story now. The main character has a particular, the reason they chose the tongue, by the way, is because the spatial resolution on the tongue for the neurons in the sensory fields is very small. So what that means is that choosing 2 points through which to compress and to cause the neurons on the tongue to experience, encode or to interpret an input of pressure. If you were to choose 2 points, you could choose 2 nearer points to one another than you could in other places on your body because the spatial resolution is so good. That's what spatial resolution is. It's telling the difference between a smaller distance with generally throughout your tongue. So that's why they chose the tongue, and that's why they actually do choose the tongue with real less spherical devices in an attempt to replace eye-dead patients. I don't know if they really call them that, but patients who have damage to their eye and not their optic nerve. They will go in and attempt to do things like this. The case study results in the main character really becoming exceptional in the story, because at this point he becomes the Phineas Gage or the HM of this research, because he really becomes the person that the phenomenon becomes readily and obviously and exceptionally vibrant and contrasts himself from the rest of the participants. Something is going on in the main character's experience with this machine, which is particularly vivid because he's kind of a loner and he's spending more time in the lab. So they wanted to get these participants in as long as they could because they felt that the phenomenon was increasing in its frequency, in the sense that the people that it would occur the most in were the people who had spent most time with the machine, and because the main character is a loner, he had spent the most time with the machine, and as a result, he had experienced the most vivid light-like images. Now, I should say that at this point that the connection between the Neospora and the bumps, because I did not make that clear, and I did not say it the right way. So they're not bumps. They are light. So the sphere can produce LEDs, which are light emitting diodes, which result in activating channels that they've recently discovered exist on the participants, on all most human tongues, all human tongues, I should say. And so this Neospora channel, which has this like opsin molecule, which can open up in response to something, is to something which will be relayed later in the story. I hope this isn't too unclear. I can make a description in the comments, but the sphere is producing light, and because we've discovered the same channel that we discovered in Neospora in the tongue of these participants, we discovered that there is a new type of light that will activate these channels, in the sense that it will open these channels. And so there's a pigment within these channels that will open them up and allow charged particles to pass through the membrane and activate these neurons that we were unable to activate before in humans, because it was unsafe to do any genetic changes to the genome and result in activating these neurons synthetically. So we found a way to activate them kind of naturally through this new particle and wave-like kind of thing that travels through space, that we've learned how to emit from a machine like this sphere. So this sphere ends up creating light that can activate these Neosporian channels, these channels that we've got from our closest common ancestor to Neospora, and it ends up causing these light disturbances. So that's the explanation that I wanted the most. So the main character ends up creating getting very bored with this two-dimensional image. It turns out that the light stuff is changing in correspondence to the different images coming in from the electron microscope, but it's giving him horrible headaches at the end of the day. They kind of accumulate, and it kind of gets worse and worse, and then it hits him all at once, and he has a terrible night. So concurrently throughout this story is this research lab, which involves a radiotelemetry wing, where scientists will come in and rent time on a giant telescope faced out toward space, and they are using the same particle-like, light-like, photon-like thing to image bodies in outer space, because it's extremely fast-moving. And they don't understand it yet. It's faster than light. It's extremely fast. It doesn't make any sense that it's faster than light. It totally destroys Einsteinian physics. But this is a science fiction story, so I'm allowed to break physics a little bit. So a lot, it turns out. But so this light, these particles travel quite fast, and so they're very important in imaging, because you can get real, images from parts of the universe for which light hasn't hit us yet. So long story short, they end up hooking these new telescopes and collaborating, which is a really important thing to me, with the neurobiology lab to attach this neurofeedback machine to this radiotelemetry device. This is new technology, so it's using this new particle light-like discovery and innovation to innovate a completely secondary in the organization. It's completely new innovation, which is this association between these two events: the Neospora channels, the light source, and the radiotelemetry usage of the same light. So and the fact that these guys have been working alongside one another, and they finally spoke with one another and collaborated and resulted in this innovation, is kind of an important thing to me. I wanted to make that comment because it does happen that labs will rent lab space, and they're very poor social animals, and tend to only talk to people in their lab, and only very few people in their lab, and they resent talking to one another even within their own lab, and you'd be very hard pressed to get them to collaborate with anyone for any reason, at least on the East Coast, in my experience in the research labs that I've worked in. So in any case, so they wind up hooking this up. He ends up getting very good at interpreting the information as a three-dimensional portrayal of cosmological information. And so he ends up imaging things in a three-dimensional space, which is completely foreign to sub-Saharan apes, which evolved on a diet of like legumes and like fruit and in an African jungle, or it's a completely new sensation to experience something. It's imagine a sphere, but imagine it from all perspectives in three dimensions. That's what this machine is portraying through a sphere in your mouth. And so it was giving him headaches to look at the two-dimensional image, whereas now he is insatiably interested in staying longer. It is wholly rewarding to make connections with the movement of the radio telescope and his perception and his tongue and his perception of this new light and shape and form that he's discovering he can utilize. And he was the candidate because he had spent most of his time in the lab, and the other participants were kind of shoddy. So he lucked out. And as the HM and Phineas Gauge of cosmology, there are lots of implications for him politically, which follow from his ability to experience things, 3D images from all perspectives, outside perspectives, visually. He becomes the lab becomes very famous, and papers published in Nature and physics journals with high impact factors are like rampant, and he's getting called for interviews and disallowed from participating in them in social media, but is sought after, and his being known becomes very important later in the story.